On my birthday, my spouse organized an unexpected celebration with her kin, aiming to replace me with another man. "I deserve someone superior," she exclaimed, while her father ridiculed me. "He was always below our standard." They uncorked sparkling wine as I departed quietly. Now she rests in her car near my home. My 35th birthday began in an almost silent way, a kind of quiet that suggested perhaps the day would remain free of drama, no extravagant gestures, no unexpected surprises, just calm. I brewed a cup of coffee while my wife, Rachel, still lay asleep in bed. There was no cheerful birthday greeting, no card or note waiting in the kitchen, only silence and an empty sink greeted me. I didn't dwell on it much. Rachel had always been somewhat distant during the early hours. We weren't in turmoil, or so I assumed. We followed our routines, paid our bills, prepared meals, and even enjoyed evenings watching Netflix. Although the connection wasn't filled with passion, it was steady and familiar, and I believed that meant safety. Around noon, she appeared downstairs looking unusually sharp, her hair styled, makeup meticulously applied, and wearing the deep red lipstick she reserved for family gatherings or important interviews. I presumed she had arranged something special for dinner. "Get dressed," she said, "and join me in the living room in 10 minutes. It's a surprise." I blinked at the word surprise, and she simply nodded with that tight, amused smile she used to hide laughter. "Just change into something decent," she added. I felt a spark of excitement. Although Rachel was not one for sentimentality and perhaps I had settled into lowered expectations over the years, the notion that she'd planned something made me feel noticed and cared for. I put on a crisp button-down and even shaved. When I entered the living room, an unsettling feeling took over. Her entire family was assembled there. Her parents, both sisters with their husbands, and even her cousin Jake from 2 states away. Everyone stood or sat around with champagne flutes in hand. I opened my mouth to ask what was happening when Rachel stepped in, holding a manila envelope by the coffee table. Locking eyes with me, she said, "Happy birthday, here's your present." With a careless flick, she dropped the envelope onto the table. Every face in the room waited in silent anticipation for my reaction. I bent down and discovered divorce papers inside. "What is this?" I asked, though deep down I knew exactly what it was. "I'm leaving you," she declared. "I've met someone new, someone with true ambition, a real man, not merely surviving." There was a brief pause as the weight of her words settled, and then her father burst out laughing, his teeth bared in a grin. "We always knew you'd outgrow this loser," he jeered, raising his glass as someone popped a bottle of champagne that fizzed over the rim. Laughter echoed again as I scanned the room, every face fixed on me, some filled with pity, others with self-satisfied glee. No one appeared shocked. It was all premeditated. Rachel wore an expression of near pride. "I didn't want to prolong the agony. I figured it would be simpler to cut through the pain quickly," she said. I remained silent, not because I was at a loss for words, but because I sensed they craved a reaction, anger, humiliation, a dramatic scene that would imprint the memory of the day they broke me. Instead, I picked up the envelope, extracted the papers, read them slowly, signed, set the pen aside, and met Rachel's gaze. "Good luck," I said softly before turning and walking out. As I left, someone called out, "Wait, what?" But I didn't pause. I got into my car, turned the key, and drove off without knowing my destination, but I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. For the first time that day, a genuine smile appeared on my face. I drove aimlessly along side streets I hadn't traveled in years, passing the high school football field where we once sat on bleachers during sultry summer nights, and the 24-hour diner we adored before life grew complicated. Everywhere I looked, remnants of a bygone comfort stared back. I didn't feel sorrow so much as a peculiar lightness, as if a burdensome coat had been shed and I was inhaling a different kind of air for the very first time. Eventually, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot. I wasn't there to shop, I just parked, engine off, hands resting on the wheel, soaking in the silence. In that moment, tears almost welled up, not for lost love, but for realizing how long I had accepted feeling unloved as normal. For years I had ignored the warning signs. Rachel had never truly respected me, she simply tolerated my presence. I was convenient, predictable, and I had mistaken that for being cherished. We met in our mid-20s. I was stuck in a job I despised, searching for my identity, while she was ambitious, decisive, and lived with urgency. Initially, she found my cautious approach endearing, even saying I grounded her. But gradually, that grounding morphed into something more like a dragging, a narrowing of her eyes whenever I shared a new idea. I noticed the dismissive eye rolls, the way she would interrupt or speak over me. I should have spoken up. Perhaps I did on a couple of occasions, but each time she made me feel overly sensitive, dismissing my concerns as mere jokes. I believed her, because it was easier than confronting the harsh truth that the person sharing my bed valued me less than a stranger's glance. That birthday ambush wasn't a betrayal, it was the final act in a long, dismal performance, and in a twisted way, I was grateful, because now I didn't have to wonder anymore. I drove to a motel on the edge of town, paid in cash. The room smelled of bleach and stale cigarette smoke, yet the bed was freshly made and the shower delivered hot water. I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, letting the silence stretch. Rachel would likely be laughing or pretending indifference, perhaps already posting pictures of the party with captions like, "New beginnings #fresh start." But I realized she had given me a gift, a kind of freedom I hadn't known I needed. I took out my phone, opened my notes app, and wrote a single sentence, "This is day 1." Then I set the phone aside, reclined, and closed my eyes. Sleep was elusive, but it finally came the next morning. I woke before sunrise in the dim motel room, bathed in the dull orange glow filtering in from the parking lot. My back ached from the cheap mattress, and my mouth was parched, yet there was an unexpected serenity, a peculiar, untainted quiet. Unsure of my next steps, I made a list, something Rachel once teased me about when she found my sticky notes tucked on the fridge or in my wallet. Those lists brought order to chaos, and that morning I craved order. I wrote, 1. Find a short-term apartment. 2. Update my mailing address. 3. Call Mark about freelance work. 4. Get a gym membership. 5. Stop obsessively checking Rachel's social media, the last item underlined. Over the next 2 days, I drove around town, calling listings and touring studios. Every place smelled of a life I once knew, yet that was exactly what I needed, something entirely unrecognizable. I signed a lease on a tiny apartment above a bakery. The floors creaked, and the water pressure was subpar, but the space was flooded with sunlight through expansive windows, feeling like a canvas of possibility. Moving in took only a few hours. I had just a few suitcases, my laptop, a coffee maker, and a duffel bag of clothes still carrying the scent of the old house. I bought a new bed, a desk, and a chair, and that was it. I didn't announce my whereabouts. I wasn't hiding, just choosing not to explain anything yet. That silence felt like a right I had earned that night. I began reading books I'd collected over the years but never finished, cooking meals from scratch, enjoying long, refreshing showers, and listening to complete albums from start to finish. I even started writing again, not for an audience, but for myself. There were moments when loneliness struck fiercely, like waking at 3 a.m. to an overwhelming quiet, or watching couples laugh outside a cafe window. I allowed myself to feel it fully, without distractions or excuses. I learned to sit with the discomfort, and gradually, things began to shift. Mornings found me walking a few blocks, then more, until I discovered a nearby park with a bench beneath a crooked oak tree. I created a simple ritual: coffee, a walk, and a moment of pause on that bench. One morning, I received a text from Rachel asking, "Are you okay?" I stared at it, left it unread. A week later, another message arrived. "You moved out fast. I guess it was easier for you." I deleted that one too. That was the moment I understood that something had irrevocably changed. The old me would have answered, tried to comfort her, tried to explain. But I owed her nothing. I owed myself everything. I drafted a new list. 1. Build something of my own. 2. say yes to opportunities. 3. Forgive myself. 4. Trust the quiet. It became my modest manifesto. I picked up a few freelance gigs, built a simple website, designed a logo, nothing monumental, but enough to remind me that I still possessed skills and value. I started tracking my expenses, setting and meeting small goals. Some mornings I awoke with anxiety weighing on me, a rock on my chest, paralyzing me with thoughts of inadequacy. Then I'd recall that feeling of being unremarkable until I left, and that irony kept me going. I joined a gym, nothing too serious, just enough to keep moving. The first time I ran a mile without stopping, I nearly broke down, not from exhaustion but from the realization that my body was still entirely mine. Each night, I began journaling, a page or two about what I saw, thought, felt, and what helped. I wrote as if I were sending letters to the man I was becoming, the man who would persist. Sometimes, I cooked entire dinners just for myself, setting a table, playing soft jazz, and savoring each bite. I began to speak aloud occasionally, not from loneliness, but simply because hearing my own voice in a judgment-free room felt liberating. One day, I unexpectedly bumped into Mark, an old college friend. We met for coffee and talked about how our lives had twisted in ways we never predicted. He even offered me more freelance projects, and without a hint of inquiry about Rachel, which was the best gift he could have offered. Weeks passed, my phone remained silent. The dull ache in my shoulders softened, and I found myself laughing at a YouTube video, a genuine laugh after months of forced smiles. Then, one Saturday morning, another text arrived from Rachel. "I miss the way you used to make coffee." The message was short. I turned off my phone and walked to the park, settling on my familiar bench as I watched a dog scamper after leaves and an elderly couple stroll by hand in hand. I didn't cry, nor did I long for what they had, I simply felt a quiet respect. That night, I tidied my apartment, rearranged the furniture, lit a candle, watched a movie alone, and resisted the urge to check my phone. It was then I realized I wasn't reconstructing my life around a painful memory. I was building it on newfound freedom. Within 3 months, Rachel's messages dwindled until they ceased entirely. By then, I was living as someone new. My freelance work picked up. I secured a steady flow of contracts that covered rent, food, and even allowed me to save a little. I never chased money. It found me gradually, in dignified installments, reminding me that I was useful once more. My apartment transformed alongside me. It grew warmer, cozier, unmistakably mine. I framed photos from my walks, acquired a record player, and even learned how to fix a leaking sink on my own. I stopped calling it an apartment. It became home. One early spring afternoon, I saw Rachel again, not face to face, but through a mutual friend's social media post from a gathering. I wasn't tagged, yet there she was in the background, alone, with her hair pulled back, makeup smudged, eyes hollow. I almost didn't recognize her. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of me, and I visited her profile. Most of her posts were gone, engagement photos with her new partner deleted, her birthday posts vanished, her feed was a barren void, as if she were trying to erase the past 6 months. The following day, I received a voicemail. "Hey, I know I shouldn't be calling, but I need to talk to you. It's not what you think, he's gone. I made a mistake. Please call me back." I listened once, then deleted it. I didn't share it with anyone, not Mark, not my parents. It felt like a private echo I didn't want bouncing around in someone else's head. Weeks slipped by, spring softened into summer. I spent more time outdoors, jogging regularly, often taking a longer route to avoid homes that reminded me of our old life. I grew stronger, braver, and started reading aloud from books each night, a few pages that made the room feel less empty, even though I had come to cherish that emptiness because it was mine. One evening, I encountered Todd, Rachel's cousin, at the grocery store. We weren't particularly close, though we had shared a few family dinners when things were better. He looked uneasy as he said, "Hey man, I just wanted to say that the whole thing on your birthday was messed up. I didn't know they were planning it like that. If I'd known, I wouldn't have come." I simply nodded, and after a pause he added, Rachel's not doing well, just thought you should know. I didn't press for details, simply wishing him a good night as I walked home slowly, not out of sadness, but to savor this newfound feeling, the ability to walk away from what no longer belonged to me. A few days later, my phone rang from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. This time, the message was brief. I'm outside. Please talk to me. I stood by my window, gazing down, and there she was, Rachel in her old car, parked across the street, her hair disheveled, eyes red, appearing smaller, not thinner, just utterly broken. I watched for what felt like an eternity. She didn't move, merely stared at the front of my building. I didn't descend, not out of hatred, but because I couldn't trust her pain. Yet she ended up spending the night there. When morning came, I left the lights off. She was still asleep, curled up in the driver's seat. My phone buzzed with a single message. Please answer. I sat at my desk, sipped my coffee slowly, and stared at the message. I chose not to reply. Instead, I opened my journal, scribbled one sentence. Some people only want you back when they realize they cannot break you. Then I closed the book and prepared for the day. That evening, I returned home to find no note, no further texts, only an empty space where her car had been. I felt not relief or regret, but certainty that I was free. Now, 6 months later, I still take my morning walks. The park bench remains mine, the crooked oak, that spot where sunlight pierces through leaves at exactly 8:12 a.m., all belonging to me. The silence I once dreaded has become a cherished clarity. I no longer have just a space, I have a home. I've hung shelves, refurbished a table found on the curb, and my kitchen now smells of coffee, burnt toast, and cinnamon. There's even a coat rack by the door with one hook left vacant, not out of longing, but because I appreciate the open space. I also rescued a dog named Bruno, who snores in his sleep, barks at squirrels as if they owed him, rides shotgun during grocery runs, and leans against my legs while I work. He asks for little, just the consistency that I can provide. Rachel hasn't reached out since that night with the car. Sometimes I wonder where she has gone or if she's okay, but those thoughts don't linger long. There's a peculiar peace in no longer chasing answers. Her final text was, "Please answer." And I responded not with words but with silence, growth, and the act of rebuilding from the wreckage she expected would break me. Mark and I even started a small agency, nothing extravagant, just a clean website, a few loyal clients, and many late-night coffees. It works, it feels real. Last week, I visited my parents. My dad hugged me longer than usual, and my mom remarked, "You seem taller somehow. Perhaps freedom does give you a better posture." I still reflect on that birthday sometimes, the sound of champagne popping, the laughter, the manila envelope. It no longer hurts. Instead, it reminds me of how far I've come. They might still recount the story differently, but I have my own tale, a narrative ending with me, Bruno, sunlight dancing on the kitchen floor, and a quiet kind of victory that doesn't need announcing. Some days I wake before my alarm, lying there listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of trees outside my window. There's no rush, no pressure to perform or prove anything. I savor my coffee slowly, enjoying the stillness. An older man who walks his golden retriever in the same park nods in silent acknowledgement as we pass, a shared simplicity without demands. Bruno knows the route, leading me to the same corner bench. He pauses for his ritual sniff by the lamp post, then settles at my feet. Sometimes I read while he naps, and sometimes I simply breathe. I once believed that growth had to be loud and dramatic, but now I understand it can be quiet, like a well-made bed, neatly stacked dishes, or always knowing where your keys are. It's the kind of peace that doesn't make headlines. Last month, I received an email from an old colleague I hadn't spoken to in years. He asked how I was, mentioning he'd heard about what happened. I didn't inquire about the details. I simply replied, "I'm doing well, thank you." He responded with, "I always thought you deserved more." I didn't cry, but his words settled in with quiet reflection. For years, I'd allowed someone else's definition of my worth to dictate my feelings. The best decision I ever made was to stop seeking permission from others to feel complete. These days, I cook more often, experiment with sauces, ruining recipes and laughing about it, nurture a houseplant that I haven't managed to kill yet, and write when inspiration strikes. I don't force productivity every minute. I call my parents more often, walk at a slower pace, and trust in my own quiet. I haven't started dating, not out of fear, but because I refuse to involve someone in a life that's still under construction. For the first time, I'm comfortable being alone. It doesn't terrify me. It feels deliberate. Healing isn't a destination, it's a rhythm, and I'm finding mine. Last week, I printed a candid photo of myself that Mark took at the office. I laughed heartily, my eyes crinkling and my shoulders relaxing. I framed it and placed it near the front door, not out of vanity, but as a reminder of the man I have become, not in spite of what happened but because I finally released what was never mine to bear. So, if you ask how my story concludes, I say it doesn't end, it grows quieter and stronger, like roots spreading under firm ground. And that, to me, is victory.